I declare the meeting open and prior to commencement, acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting tonight and pay respects to elders past and present. Also advise that the meeting is being recorded audio visually and will be available later in the week on the website. Item 1 is apologies. We have Doug Dowd,
Yeah, coming. Yeah.
There are no apologies.
Yeah.
Item 2 is rates and charges policy. Chair, I invite proposer and seconder. I'll take Heather as the mover and Jock as the seconder. Woman Chong and Campbell. We are in a meeting. Pardon me. Speakers.
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor, I think council policies, whether they're the rates, charges or other policies, are really important because they set the scene for everybody else to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it's important for consistency and it's important for clarity, both for us and for the ratepayers, that all these things are available and understood. I think these amendments are sensible, particularly given they've come mostly recommended by our legal counsel, which suggests it's probably appropriate to do them because it helps make sure that they are clear and can be, what am I looking for? Understandable. No. Okay. Understandable will do. If I think of the word, I'll come back to it later.
Thank you. Alderman Campbell. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I tried to summarise comments that I'd like to make in this that I have in front of me. First of all, at a meeting at Ferntree on the weekend, I was lucky to have some colleagues from Hobart, Glenorchy and Brighton councils, and all of them mentioned that councils should endeavour to pass on rate increases commensurate with the CPI.
Alderman James, we are talking about the policy at this stage, not the rates themselves. Thank you.
In relation to policy, I have some concerns that we have inserted in some extra sections, 5.4.2, and that reference is new in as much as that we haven't had it before, and all rebates within the section are to be subject to written application to the General Manager. The General Manager is hereby provided with delegation to make determination with respect to such applications. Notwithstanding that, then on the other sections, there has been included within 5.12.1 with regard to waste management service. It also adds to the satisfaction of the General Manager. 5.12.2 also refers to for a waste management service to the satisfaction of the General Manager, and so on. 5.12.3 to the satisfaction of this is residential properties, to the satisfaction of the General Manager. 5.12.4, all rebates within the section are to be subject to written application to the General Manager. Mr Mayor, all of these items are new insertions within the policy. I can understand where there is a processing reason to include the delegation to the General Manager. It just seems to me that we have in this new policy, rates and charges policy, every section, with the exception of 5.14 and actually 5.11.4 and 5.12, has had the inclusion of to the satisfaction of the General Manager. I have difficulty supporting this because whenever we're talking about delegation, in the past we haven't had these clauses inserted. on this occasion we've had a number of them put in, and I, for one reason or other, would have thought that if there is some concern or there is some reason for the delegation to the General Manager to utilise that delegation, then in fact why hasn't it happened before, and why now are we having so many sections of our policy basically handballed to the General Manager? I think this needs to be, we've had a workshop on it, but I'm not satisfied that are we handing over powers that I believe we otherwise have had in our assessment of rebates and how they impact upon the community. I'm not satisfied that we have had enough reasoning given as to why the delegation has been given to the General Manager, when in the past I would have thought that this matter would have come to the Council or would have been considered by Council as part of its normal processes. So by including this in our policy, it means taking these matters, as we just mentioned in these sections of the policy, out of the hands of Council and now handballing under delegation to the General Manager.
Mr Mayor, a question through you, possibly to Mr Barter, on the matters raised by Alderman Jones. I'm just wondering, all the references to the powers granted to the General Manager, interpreting these various clauses, is my understanding correct that those were actually given in previous years in our rates motion, and what we're actually doing in this instance is taking those, instead of providing them in the motion each year, putting them in the policy so that it's so that it's clearer and more permanent?
Through you, Mr Mayor, that's essentially correct. The issue with these rebates, and this is the foundation of the legal advice, is if you look at them, they all relate to matters that are essentially subjective. What we in Council in the past have I don't understand what the intent is, but they are effectively subjective. Which talks about how housing is essentially used for welfare purposes. If we've got an understanding of that, it's not legal. I would probably add that effectively all
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to draw Council's attention to something that Mr Barter said in his answer, and that is the interpretations that are being, the powers given to the General Manager to make those interpretations for matters that are subjective and very difficult, if not impossible, to actually codify in the policy. I think that's an important point to make. I think it behoves anyone who has an issue with the General Manager being granted the power to to make those judgments, to make those very subjective decisions, to actually come up with an alternative mechanism. And I'd be interested, it's unfortunate that Alderman Jones won't have an opportunity in this debate to suggest what that mechanism might be, given that he's raised concerns with this, but I would be interested to know what that alternative mechanism might be. I certainly have trust in the General Manager. Of course, it's not just about our General Manager now, it'll be about future General Managers, but we need to understand that we do grant General Managers, being in that position, a fair bit of power, and ultimately they are answerable to Council, and I think we need to place that trust in them.
Yeah, other speakers. Alderman Coucil.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to firstly say it's the responsibility of Aldermen to understand policy, they set. Now, Alderman, the Council has set this policy, and as I said, Aldermen clearly need to understand the policy. Surely the task of administering policy, a policy such as this set by Council, should rightly be administered by Council officers. In this case, the General Manager. We can't have faith in a General Manager administering policies that we've developed, well then we're in a pretty sorry state.
Other speakers. Alderman Bomberto.
I think it's also important, Mr Mayor, to, if you like, reiterate that we're formalising something that has actually been occurring in the past. So I think that's actually a really important and strategic move, that we're formalising this within a policy rather than having it within our rating resolution. Because this is happening on an ongoing basis, and as has been pointed out by some of the other aldermen, we have and need to have trust in our General Manager. So I think it is very appropriate that we are actually formalising.
Oh.
I agree with the sentiments in supporting the policy. Being a devil's advocate like I am at times, just wondering if the General Manager actually got it wrong. What process, or there was a discrepancy or some kind of complaint about a decision, what process would then go into play?
Through you, Mr Mayor, if there was any ongoing disagreement with the determination I'd made in respect of this policy, it would have to come back to Council for determination.
Alderman Walker.
Yes, unlike some other municipalities people might wish to care to draw comparisons with, this isn't a vox pop, a vote or a KPI on the current General Manager of the City of Clarence. This is just some administrative paperwork. This is just about dealing with the fact that at some point in the future there could well be somebody else, and this sort of stuff in paper just makes the whole continuation and the process far more simpler, and actually gives some clarity to ratepayers about how decisions will be coming to be arisen as well. It's just eminently sensible.
Thank you, Mr. It's our role and our responsibility in this chamber to set policy, to set the rates and charges. It is not our role nor our responsibility to do the day-to-day operational work of Council. I think what we're doing with this policy is putting that firmly in writing so it's really easy for everybody to understand that, and I see Council's support.
The motion is the officer's recommendation that the draft amended rates and charges policy at attachment 1 be adopted and highlighted changes contained being approved. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 3 is the rates and charges for 2016-17, and there are significantly lengthy recommendations, but I'll take it all at one go. Alderman Hume, thank you. Second that. Alderman Coucil, thank you. Alderman Hume.
Yeah, but we've debated this issue quite extensively in our workshop. I think the increase we've decided on is a pretty good result and will probably be the envy of ratepayers in a number of other council areas. it's a bit higher than our increase last year, but certainly highly necessary. I have said to all my colleagues that I would like us to, in future budgets, be able to sort of have a little bit less of an ad hoc process for determining our rates increases. I do still maintain that 1.9% is a good result, but in terms of it'd be good to look at some indicators around long-term trends, cost of living, cost of goods and services. We're tracking against those. Those aren't very meaningful necessarily from year to year, but I think if we look at long-term trends in those indexes. Keeping rates affordable, but still balancing that against delivering the services that our ratepayers need.
Coucil?
We've debated and discussed it at length at workshops as part of the overall budget discussion, and I agree with Alderman Hume. I think it's fine for us.
James?
And I haven't as yet had a chance to look at Alderman Hume's comments, which initially was that the feeling from other ratepayers from outside Clarence, from Brighton, Glenorchy and Hobart, is that council should really be looking at a rate increase commensurate with the CPI. The reason why I have concerns about the 1.9% is initially I thought it was great, and I think we set out to bring about 1.9, and that was a good effort because we set the rate from the outset, and therefore the officers went about very well indeed, I thought, to go and come up with that percentage of under 2%. But there were some concerns that I had, and I signalled those earlier in the piece, particularly about these special committees of council, and there have been increases for three in particular. I don't need to go through them because I've already said of 171% increase above the previous financial year, 896% and 360%. And if those had been of a reasonable adjustment, then we could have actually reduced the 1.9 by about 0.3 of 1%, to bring it down to 1.6, if that was our intention. It wasn't, and therefore we have left those figures as is. And I'm hopeful that next year we will have a very close look at this and see that we don't have those percentage increases as has been passed on this year to the ratepayers. The other thing that I want to mention here is the 6.39% from the rates that have actually gone into the renewal reserve, which in fact has given more of, in my view, more funding on the expenditure side to do a lot of more capital works. Remember that we are taking funds out of the rates, or taking rate monies out and dropping them into the renewal budget. And therefore, because we are increasing the renewal amount, that we do have a number of projects that we can actually utilise as far as expenditure goes. And I think that is really defeating the purpose of trying, when the comments made that we're not taking specifically monies out of the rates, we are just trying to make sure that we don't run the capital works into any deficit. The other point, number 4, is that I believe there could be some help and assistance to independent living units, in particular to those persons that actually have gone into, and this is some years back, where they were advised that there was going to be no general rate increase. And there are a number of those contracts are in place, which in fact they have said, that's those people that signed those contracts 5 or 6 years ago, that there would be no general rate. I think they've been unfairly treated, and I thought that the motion that I put up in March, where there was that sort of hold off until year 2 or 3, when we could in fact pass on that rate to those people. And finally, point 5 is that what I believe a higher than normal 36% increase in expenditure into the Human Resource Department. I think that's a lot. It's there earmarked against training. I know that there would be some blue-collar workers that would have the benefit of training, but predominantly it's the white-collar worker in that sense. In conclusion, Mr Mayor, with the capital works budget, I think that the appropriation of $1 million to the Bayfield Street streetscape in this financial year and another $1.24 million in 17-18, in fact over 2 financial years, $2.24 million, when in fact I think a number of projects could have been identified and work done on them. And finally, with respect to the $900,000 that was allocated to the Risdon Vale change rooms upgrade, it was decided that those funds were not warranted, and therefore the community is of a disadvantage in not having that.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Alderman McFarlane.
With regard to some of the comments about special committees around the table, I would like to point out that those particular committees which look at implementing projects to benefit the community target specific areas. Within the everyday management of council, looking at roads and potholes and the bread and butter of council, there is actually room in the budget for these benefits to the community to be added on. Council has adopted a health and wellbeing policy, and within those areas, Council has been accredited by many corporations that espouse the health and wellbeing of the community. We need to be balanced in what we do within our rate structure. A lot of the projects put forward by the special committees didn't even affect the rates. So within any future discussion which is being put forward by Alderman Hong, I feel that we do need to look at strategically the whole of the budget, so that some of the discussions we end up having annually every year about the same potholes really gets put to bed, because it's time we had a real strategic direction of the budget that benefits everybody.
Alderman Chong.
One of the things that frustrates me about the use of CPI as a benchmark, I guess, for discussions about rates, is it's made up of a basket of goods, most of which have absolutely nothing to do with anything we do at council. I mean, the reality is the local government cost index is probably significantly closer. Even then, there will be some different things, which came in, as I understand, at 1.87% this year, so we're pretty close. But using an arbitrary number to make a decision always seems to me a little false and unnecessary, and really doesn't give anybody any comfort that we're doing the best that we can with the budget and the monies that we have to allocate. I think it's a cheap way to make a call, but I don't think it's necessarily very sensible.
One interesting point in the table we had of all the various properties and their categories, that there was only 2 of them that in actual fact came out over 1.9%. In fact, the majority of them were 1.4, 5, 6% generally as a rule. So the message is being preached out there to the public, it's 1.9, but in fact, for many, it's a lot less.
Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just going to comment a bit on what Alderman Hughes talked about. And I actually think at the Office of Fundamentals, the tin tacks of the lights of the rubbish and some of the road stuff, how that comes together, I think it's done with rigour and it's done in a pretty tight way. So that's never concerned me when I've approached any of the budgeting processes that I've been in. I have a degree of discomfort around active and passive rec and how certain things end up. And this year, I think we started the approach of trying to put a bit more method around that than times past. We need to really step up from that, but I acknowledge that that was a start, and I appreciate that the work that the officers did to help along this. And I actually think there's an opportunity in this domain for Clarence to perhaps come up with a tool that could be used by other people, and I'd certainly be happy to be exploring an evaluation tool. Maybe it's a project, possibly a PhD study for a student at ACLEG or any of the other tertiary institutions in local government, to actually be getting at things so that when we come to a project for, say, a specific sporting event, we can be rating it against the number of participants, the ages, the gender, all that sort of stuff to get the picture. Because I think historically, Clarence is no more of a sinner than probably other councils, but I think, you know, history has been more of a indicator of a project success than rigour, and that's concerned me from the get-go. I will mention Riston Vale, and I want to say that as someone that spends a fair bit of time in that community, and I know many people do, I am quite relieved at the approach we took, because I think it would be infuriating just to throw a new building there and say, look, we've done that, and walk away. We didn't ask whether you need it, we don't know how much you're going to use it, but there, that's our effort, now leave us alone. There's a real opportunity for something particularly special in this area, and if we work in time with what that needs, first we've got to identify what the needs are before we just do it, and I think that the way that we've budgeted will allow that to happen, and that really is a prudent and appropriate, and I would think in the medium to longer term, a much more appreciated approach. CPI was mentioned. Well, we can adopt that. We can charge the general manager, and we can, Mr. Stevens, say we want to go to back solving. So you tell us what numbers we need to put in with our depreciation schedules, and we'll just fiddle the books and do that. Now, that ain't the way to do it. CPI is not the measure. CPI is a measure to be conscious of, but to be targeting that is setting yourself up for a fall. Bayfield Street got mentioned. Bayfield Street isn't a vanity project by any means. It's a safety project. It's about increased activity and inclusion and people being able to use it. It's about improving commerce in the high street. It's a sensible bit of infrastructure improvement. I won't be so charitable on the 21st anniversary celebrations of the Jazz Festival, but then again, it's not my budget. I don't get to choose everything. There are bits I like, there are bits I don't. It's certainly not something to vote against the budget for. I was disappointed with Council's white flag approach to Taswater, and anybody that's bleating the rates are too high and we haven't done a good enough effort. If they didn't support a more prudent approach around the Taswater asset management, I don't know how you rationalise that. Independent living units have come up in the discussion tonight, and I don't know that Council ever told people moving into those that they'll never pay rates. If people that were developing them told them that, that's really a matter between them and the residents. I care about all pensioners in this municipality, including the 5,000 that don't live in those facilities, and often live in more modest facilities as well. We want both, but we've got to, you know, the narrower the rating base, the higher the rating effort. And we're trying to approach this in a fair approach, and the 12-month lead-in, I think, was the way to go. I certainly haven't agreed with everything, Mr Mayor, that Alderman James has said, but it is true to say we are in financially constrained times, and I think that the budgeting processes have indicated that in the last few years. So this is not a case of bashing committees and saying that they're not adding value. They do help us frame the needs and aspirations of our community and identify infrastructure, but to suggest that there should be a leave pass given and that the constraint that's been put on every other bit of this organisation around the 1.9% and the other efforts that are being put in place to say that committees shouldn't be, you know, conscious of these things, I think wouldn't be the way to go either. So I will vote for this, and I do hope that perhaps between now and the next time we do get some more rigour around some of the active and passive budgeting.
Thanks, Alderman Walker. Alderman Pearce.
In my time here, I've been through many budgets and there's a lot of things I've agreed with and a lot of things I certainly haven't agreed with, but that's a budget. In the end, we come to a consensus. Some of the things Alderman James and Alderman Walker have said, I totally agree with or totally disagree with. But in the end, it's taken rigour, a lot of time, a lot of reading to get to a point of 1.9. Not everything am I happy with because I lost some things. So what? We came to a consensus, and I think a very good consensus compared to a lot of other councils. Also, I must say that I haven't had one complaint about the 1.9. People think we're a pretty modest council, we're doing a pretty good job, and to only have a 1.9 increase, a lot of people think we should be congratulated. So, Mayor, the time and effort we've spent on this, I think it's really a fairly good achievement. I agree with Alderman Chong too. CPI, what does it mean? I've been in this chamber when we've had floods. All of a sudden we've had to put emergency money into flood relief. We've had fires. We've had to put money into crews to fight fires. So things do change along the way which you just do not account for. So in this case, 1.9, I think, Mayor, I think it's a very, very good result.
Right reply, Alderman Yam.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I thank all the aldermen for their contributions to this debate. Just on the issue of the rate increases and finding indexes to benchmark them against, it is a benchmarking exercise. I don't think we should be, capping or anything of that along those lines. But CPI is a pretty crude measure to use. I don't understand what is so magic about CPI. It doesn't reflect the increase in the costs of providing council services and infrastructure, and it also doesn't actually reflect the increases in household budgets. Household budgets over time, as the economy grows, actually tend to grow in excess of CPI. I think if we're going to benchmark, then in terms of maintaining the same level of services, I think the cost of council services is a good index to look at, and another good index to look at would be the increases in household incomes within our area, to the degree that we can, but because it is difficult to get good measures of those things, it really must be a benchmarking exercise rather than saying we're going to raise it by X%. But those would be some useful benchmarks to use. Independent living units, who were the residents advised by that they wouldn't pay rates? Well, I would suggest that it was actually the service providers. As Alderman Walker astutely pointed out, that is an issue between the residents and the owners and operators in the independent living units. This is really an issue of equity with others, equity with the other thousands of pensioners across our city who pay full rates minus a rebate, and I think it's fair to apply the same to residents of independent living units. The Risdon Vale issue, that community wasn't dudded. The decision was actually deferred, the funding was deferred so that we could provide a better outcome, so that we could better plan for the facilities there and actually provide something that more of the community could benefit from. And I will fight tooth and nail, and I'm sure a number of aldermen around the table will also do that in the next budget, provided that we've gone through the proper planning and the consultation to see what kind of facility a number of groups in that community need, and to provide a facility that meets those needs. I will certainly fight for that funding, and I know a number of my colleagues will as well. I just want to draw on some comments that Alderman McFarlane and Alderman Walker made.
You could wind up there, please.
I did include in my comments to Alderman that we could have some more strategic consideration of items of the budget, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks,
Mayor.
Alderman Hume. So the motion is that Clarence Council sets the general rate, service rate and the service charges under the Local Government Act and the Fire Service Act. All those in favour? Against? Carried. And I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you.